All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this conversation. We're really grateful here at the State Innovation Exchange, or SIX for short, to be hosting this conversation with the National Homelessness Law Center to learn about how to effectively fight back against the criminalization of people experiencing homelessness. This is designed to be a conversation. We'll be outlining the different billionaire interests behind these attacks across the country, highlight specific state campaigns to learn from the best messaging, stories, policies and partners to effectively fight back, along with proactive policy solutions to address the affordability crisis and the crisis that really could impact any one of us in homelessness. As noted, we ask folks to please introduce yourself in the chat. This briefing is recorded and will be password protected, and we will be sending these slides following this conversation. We also have time for Q&A. This is a conversation, so please welcome to pop your questions in the chat or at the end of this call, we'll have time for folks to share what they're experiencing in their state and the different lessons they have, and we want to hear directly from you what you need. I'm super grateful to have Jesse Rabowitz of the National Homelessness Law Center, who is a campaigns and communications director and just a badass organizer all around. And with that, I'm going to toss a virtual mic to Jesse to run us through this presentation and lead us in this conversation.
Thanks, and thanks to Six and Ida for having me. It's been really fun to collaborate with y'all on this, and it's also really exciting for us to see just more of an interest in understanding that the attack on homeless people is an attack on all of us, and that if we really want to get serious about addressing the affordable housing crisis, we can't do that without focusing on the people who are most impacted by that, and that is folks who are so priced out of housing that they live outside. I'm going to walk through a medium quick slide deck in hopes to kind of put all of this in context. It has some sample policies, it has some sample language, things we hope are actionable for you, but I really want to save a lot of time for Q&A towards the end. So I'm going to go through this. We'll share out the slides. As Ida mentioned, this is being recorded, so no need to take notes, but I hope that this kind of helps set the stage and ground our conversation. We like to start with a few truths that, despite what people in DC would like you to think, are true. Um, More people are sleeping outside than ever before because housing is too expensive. We have a housing system that is rigged and run by billionaires for billionaires, and that results in about the fact that 50% of renters pay more than they can afford each month. 1 in 4 households worry about imminently becoming homeless, and 1 in 5 people pay 100% of their income on rent. That is not indicative of a housing system that works for most people. And when a housing system is broken, that means more people have no choice but to sleep outside. Um, I am in DC and have done a lot of work on this issue for the past decade, everything from homeless street outreach to working in drop-in centers to local organizing, policy, advocacy, social work, and have been at the Law Center for about 2.5 years. And have seen in my career that despite what the Trump administration would want people to believe, the solution to homelessness has and always will be housing and supports. I have seen firsthand people move from the streets into housing, and in that housing find stability, get their health back on track, and plug into the community. And have seen, and continue to see every day that housing works, housing solves homelessness, despite what other folks would want you to believe. And the last thing I'll end with on this kind of framing slide is that homelessness is caused by white supremacy and other oppressive systems. Full stop. Where I'm at in DC, 9 out of 10 people experiencing homelessness are Black. About 45% of the population writ large is Black. That shows that this is not an accident. This is a result of a system that was designed to funnel people, particularly Black and brown people, into homelessness. Oddly, that gives me a little bit of hope because the system was designed by people, which means we can design a new system and we can build a new world. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to largely be focusing on the rise of laws that make it a crime to be homeless, but want to be really clear that these laws are not new. They're baked into the DNA of our country. And also, when the president of the United States is using a bullhorn to attack people experiencing homelessness, to attack people who use drugs, to attack people who are sick and Black and brown and migrants and disabled, that does illustrate an increased escalation. So these laws are not new, and also they're getting worse. Um, and it is not a coincidence that they are getting worse, right? These same people who are profiting from the migrant detention crisis are the same people who are influential and shaping homelessness policy at the city, state, and national level. And we'll get into that now. But before we do that, I really want we at the Law Center think and know that the attack on homeless people is textbook authoritarianism. I was talking with a researcher yesterday who has looked at the history of authoritarian regimes, and she shared that she sees authoritarian regimes go after two groups of people. One is people who are believed to be foreign, and one is homeless people. We see both of them happening now, and I think what one of the things we need help doing is to remind folks that just as people are rightfully outraged about the attacks on immigrants, so too should they be outraged at the attacks on folks who can't afford to live inside, because they are both streams of authoritarianism and the same people who are leading the attacks. I think that a key to authoritarianism is dehumanization, and have seen, and continue to see a dehumanization of people experiencing homelessness. We saw this when a Fox News host went on air and said that we should lethally inject, that we should kill homeless people. The man who murdered Jordan Neely, who was a homeless, mentally ill Black New Yorker, was not only acquitted, he was invited to attend a football game in the J.D. Vance Donald Trump box suite. Um, a woman in Kentucky was given a citation for sleeping outside while she was in active labor, but the police officer didn't believe she was in labor, even though it was clear to me as I watched the body cam video that her water had just broken. You don't believe someone is not in labor if you're not if you think they're a full human. And we saw this in Atlanta on MLK weekend when a man named Cornelius Taylor was killed when the city was clearing his tent. They treated him like trash. And in DC, I've talked with outreach workers who say that their clients feel safer dressing up as trash to go to sleep than they do as going to sleep as people. They feel like they will be in less trouble if they are trash than they are people. This is dehumanization. Full stop. And now this dehumanization is shaping policy. Um, I am curious, and this is a small group, could folks just drop in the chat if folks have heard of the Cicero Institute? A nod, maybe, can't really tell. Okay, I'm gonna do just a quick overview because I think the Cicero Institute is where all of these connections come through. So most folks have not heard of Cicero, but I'm sure most people have heard of Palantir. But for those of you who don't know, Palantir sells and has sold facial recognition technology to militaries across the country, including to the Trump administration, which they then use to define, deport, attack migrants, generally not people that care about the same folks that we care about. Palantir co-founder Joe Lonsdale founded this organization called the Cicero Institute, which is a far right-wing think tank based in Austin, Texas. And they have been passing and trying to pass cookie cutter bills across the country, including in many of the states that I know folks are here, like with that in many states where folks here are from, their cookie cutter bills generally have four pillars. One is a statewide camping ban with fines up to $5,000. They also defund the proven solutions to homelessness like housing and support, and instead fund these backwards programs like treatment first, things that we used to do as a country and just don't do anymore because they don't work. They also make it easier to funnel people into forced detention and decrease the rigors needed for forced psychiatric treatment and involuntary commitment, and they increase the policing of homeless people. Notably, none of these things address homelessness. None of them make rent cheaper. None of them provide services. All they do is pave the way to make it a crime to be homeless. I like to shout out Kentucky. Kentucky added an extra provision in their Cicero law that says if there is a homeless person on your private property, you can use stand your ground laws and use force and even deadly force to remove them. So they have made it legal to kill homeless people. That is who you're talking about. We are seeing some new developments in their laws. I think we've gotten a little bit successful in defeating this cookie cutter bill. So we're seeing a few new iterations. One, we're seeing this kind of partnership with the Goldwater Institute, which is another one of those right-wing think tanks that says um, there's some different ways it's shaping out, but the way that we're seeing it now, we saw it in Arizona and we're seeing it in Georgia now, are that if you're if you are a homeowner, a property owner, or a renter, and you believe that your property value has been diminished by the city's failure to evict a nearby encampment, you can sue the city or withhold taxes. So just another way that we're seeing this pop up, and there's an active bill in Georgia right now around that. We're also seeing the Cicero Institute go really hard on they're separating out all of these bills instead of it being one package. Now we're seeing in Nebraska, for example, they have one bill that is the statewide camping bill and one separate bill that lowers the threshold for involuntary commitment. So they're trying to sneak these through in different ways. We're also seeing this play out in Indiana. For the past 2 years, our allies and advocates in Indiana have defeated the Cicero Institute's bills, right? They have beat back this billionaire think tank. They're back again for the third time, and they've gotten really smart in their targeting and their lobbying, and it looks like the Indiana bill is going to pass this time. So we're seeing them continue to run legislative campaigns until they win. Um, Again, I just have to say it, these bills are never going to solve homelessness. States that have passed Cicero bills have not solved homelessness because these bills are not addressed at solving homelessness. They are addressed at criminalizing and dehumanizing and demonizing folks who can't pay rent and really providing elected officials to pass the buck and to shift blame from their failures to fund housing and supports that people need and onto people who are living outside because they can't afford rent. So Cicero Institute, think Palantir, think billionaire back interest. These are all connected. This is a bit of an old map, but looks at many, oops, I went too far. Many of the states that have Cicero or Cicero-like bills. We are getting word of a Cicero bill being introduced this legislative session probably every 3 days. So we really have to update our map, but they're moving pretty fast and pretty hard. Um, I think the one piece of good news is that last year there were 54 bills introduced in state houses across the country to make it a crime to be homeless. And advocates, with the help of folks on this call, defeated 80% of those laws. So we do see people rising up and fighting back against these laws. One of the things that I want you and your bosses to know is that despite what the rhetoric might seem, laws that make it a crime to be homeless are deeply, deeply unpopular, with nearly 70 to 80% of people, when polled, rejecting them. And we did this poll, the ACLU did this poll, other people have done this poll, totally independent, and we're all getting the same results, which shows us that most people are realizing that these laws that make it a crime to be homeless are not good policy. Um, we are defeating some bills on the state levels, which gives me hope. But again, these billionaires have limitless resources, and the local homeless service providers in small cities and towns across the country don't. But we can see that we can still fight back and win. The Cicero Institute also has their fingerprints all over the Johnson versus Grants Pass Supreme Court case. As folks know, 19 and a half months ago, the Supreme Court ruled that Grants Pass in Oregon and cities across the country can ticket people and can fine people, can arrest people for sleeping outside even when they have nowhere else to go. The Cicero Institute notably filed a brief in favor of criminalization in Grants Pass. And since the Grants Pass ruling, we've seen over 300 cities across the country introduce laws and 300 have passed laws that make it a crime to be homeless. These laws are often different, but many of them include things like $1,000 in a fine and 6 months in jail. Doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that if you had $1,000, you would not be sleeping outside. and that throwing someone in jail for 6 months makes it harder for them to find a job, makes it harder for them to find housing, and ultimately makes homelessness worse. But again, these laws are not designed to help homeless folks. They're designed to punish people for being poor in this country. Um, so now we see the Cicero Institute through the Supreme Court influencing city level policies as well. This is just a heat map that looks at the density of laws. Again, this is 6 months old. Many more laws have been passed in the past 6 months. And now we get to Joe Lonsdale, the co-founder of Palantir and of the Cicero Institute. It didn't get enough coverage, but this billionaire said that if he were in charge, he would publicly execute people who break the law. This is the person who is shaping homelessness policy in the United States. This should be terrifying to all of us. He has fully enmeshed himself with a power structure in DC, right? He hosted a fundraiser for JD Vance and Greg Abbott. He meets with the White House and with the Pentagon. He is deeply connected to Elon Musk. We are seeing this radical right-wing billionaire shape homelessness policy through the Trump administration. But that wouldn't be possible unless Lonsdale and Trump were already ideologically aligned. Donald Trump openly campaigned on a plan to round up homeless people and force them into government-run detention camps. He has said as such. When his HUD secretary was questioned under oath during his confirmation hearing, he was asked, "Do you support forcing homeless people into relocation camps?" And he did not say no. Anybody who can't say we do not put people in camps in this country, full stop, is not only not qualified to run a federal agency, they're not qualified to work for the government. But this is the context in which we're operating. And now Joe Lonsdale is providing them with policy solutions that make it a crime to be homeless. As I think folks know, in the spring, the Trump administration authored a incredibly racist and harmful anti-homeless executive order. If you were to compare the text side by side to Cicero's cookie cutter template bills, they would be the same. It is not a coincidence. They are the same because the same people are pushing for them. And we've already seen the results of this executive order play out. I'm in DC. DC was the first place we saw this. I have an old slide deck. I'll show you pictures in a few minutes. But in DC, we saw the federal government, the Park Police, the Secret Service, the FBI, Homeland Security, ICE, targeting people who were sleeping outside, and then all of their stuff got thrown away. It was notable that part of the reason Trump said he needed to take over DC was because there were homeless people here. We also saw a huge shift in how HUD allocates fundings to cities and states across the country. If this had gone through, it would have forced 170,000 people, primarily seniors and people with disabilities, who used to be homeless, who are now stably housed back into homelessness. Thankfully, through a case that we and folks across the country brought, have beaten this back for now. But we expect more similar harm to come in the future. The reason HUD said they needed to make those changes was to comply with this anti-homeless executive order. And 2 weeks ago, HHS announced $100 million in funding, support supposedly for mental health. If you read actually what's going to happen, it is really geared towards coercive, forced treatment of folks with mental health issues. Again, when asked why they needed to do this, they kept pointing back to Trump's anti-homeless executive order. And we saw in Utah, Governor Cox say that he was so inspired by Trump's executive order that he wrote his own one for the state of Utah, which we will get to more in a minute. What we see is a clear desire and a clear pattern of wanting to round up folks and force them into government-run detention camps. Again, we see that with immigrants. We see that with homeless people. These are both paths of authoritarianism. And we are asked often, what is a homeless detention camp? We can look to Louisiana for some guidance. Last year during the Super Bowl, Louisiana spent about $17.5 million to force 100 homeless people under threat of arrest into an old warehouse. The warehouse did not really have heat, even though it was the winter. It didn't have good running water. And then after the Super Bowl was over, and when the tourists and media left town, They closed the warehouse and people went back to the streets. For the amount of money they spent to warehouse people for 2 months, they could have solved homelessness for 80% of people in New Orleans for a year. So this shows us not only are these detention centers ineffective, right? This didn't solve homelessness for anybody. It just hid people for a little while. They're also incredibly expensive. This used to be the only example that we could really talk about. Unfortunately, Utah has blown up New Orleans' model and made it a whole lot worse. So Governor Cox issued his own executive order, kind of inspired by Trump's, and central to his plan to follow the Trump blueprint. He has expressed a desire to create a massive government-run detention camp that will have about 1,300 beds to force homeless people into. This is only possible because Utah already has a Cicero cookie cutter bill. So it is already illegal to sleep outside. What Utah's plan is now is to take money that is going to fund housing and support and funnel that into the creation of a remote detention camp with up to 800 beds where people will be held against their will and against their will and will be forced to undergo forced treatment, forced medication, forced psychiatric, God knows what. There's also talk about requiring people in this detention camp to perform free labor in order to get the privilege of living inside. This is what we are up against. That they have been really clear that this is their plan. Um, we've been doing a lot of work with our friends in Utah, and it looks like Utah state elected officials are not interested in funding this year, which is a huge victory. What's really scary, though, is those HUD changes that I mentioned that Trump is trying to push through would give HUD and the Trump administration a green light to move funding from any of the cities that you are in and redirect it towards Utah to build a homeless detention camp. So while Utah might not have the money, $100 million is a drop in the bucket for the federal government. And HUD has already said that they are interested in Utah's approach. So, so like measured good news that we think it's not going to be funded with state money. I'm really concerned it's going to be funded with federal money. And we know that Utah is a test case. We know that states across the country, I think right now, particularly Texas and Florida, are looking to see how Utah moves forward because they want to bring this to their state as well. This is what they have been setting the path for, and we are in this moment where there's a real possibility that they will force homeless people into these government-run detention camps. Um, this is authoritarianism. We talked about that a little bit. It's not going to stop in DC. It's not going to stop in Utah. It's going to spread everywhere, and it's not going to stop with homeless people and migrants, right? They're testing out these policies on people that they don't like, and people who they believe have little public sympathy. But their goal is to expand the concentric circles of people that they are targeting, which is why we have to stand up loudly right now and say, no, we do not put people in camps. We do not make it a crime to be sick or homeless or poor or black. And we really have to do a better job of making that case together. Um, some things we're working on last year at the anniversary of the Grants Pass ruling, Congress members Jayapal and Frost introduced the Housing Not Handcuffs Act, which is federal legislation that would prevent the federal government from making it a crime to be homeless. Um, but we also have local bills doing the same thing. So this is an example in Maryland. They introduced a version of our template legislation, the Gloria Johnson Act, that would have prevented the state from making it a crime to be homeless. These laws are designed to restore the protections that the Supreme Court gutted. Want to be really, really clear. This is not anybody's vision of justice. This is not the ground floor. This is the basement. We should not have to be fighting to say the government can't arrest people for being homeless. But that is what we are doing. And we're using this as an opportunity to build power so that we can better fight for the real solutions to homelessness, like housing and support. Over a dozen states have introduced or are planning to introduce a version of this act. And you might be asking, we talked about the Goldwater thing. You might be asking, how can I introduce an act in my state? Check out our website. Ida is going to send all this out. We have 3 template bills ready to go for you. One is the Gloria Johnson Act, which again restores the protections that the Supreme Court cut it. One is about surplus properties. It's a template legislation that would say that if a city or a state government has an abandoned building before it can be sold, they have to turn it or try to turn it into affordable housing and housing for homeless folks. And one is to protect homeless services providers. Folks may have seen last year in Fremont, California, there was a bill that passed but was ultimately revoked that said since sleeping outside is a crime, giving aid to people who are sleeping outside is considered aiding and abetting homeless people. So this would have prohibited things like homeless street outreach. There was the story of a mother whose kid was sleeping outside because they were homeless, and the cops basically said, like, you can't help your kid. So this is a provider bill that this is a bill that restores or that protects homeless service providers. Other things we really need help on, and I'm going to wrap up soon and take questions, I promise. Be a voice pushing back on this anti-homeless sentiment. It's everywhere. I know y'all see it all of the time, and we really need to do some work to help people understand that this housing crunch that is affecting all of us is the same thing that's causing homelessness. And the solution isn't to throw people in jail. The solution is to build a housing system where people can get by and people don't have to choose between food, healthcare, and rent, and to build a system that works for most people. We're also really asking folks to push their state congressional delegations on things like the Housing Not Handcuffs Act to build up the support for real solutions to homelessness. Um, and I wanted to do just a quick messaging thing because I'm a comms dork and I'd ask him to, and I can't say no to Ida. Um, we, this is in part a communications battle, right? We are getting whomped by these people who are conflating homelessness with crime, with mental illness. So we really have to start with our values. Start by naming our values that we all agree on. Help people punch up. Right now, our opposition is having people punch down. People are blaming homeless people for being homeless instead of blaming the government for allowing 700,000 people to sleep outside each night. We have to tell the truth and name what's going on. This is caused by the fact that the rent is too damn high, and higher rents equal higher homelessness. Every time rent goes up by $100, homelessness goes up by 9%. So think about how many times your rent or your mortgage has gone up by $100. That's why there are more people sleeping outside. And remind folks that we already know what works, housing and support. We are seeing thousands of people get housed across the country every month. The problem is our housing system is so broken, more people are entering into homelessness than people who are moving into housing. So it looks like we're not making any progress. We are making progress. It's just different people are falling into the river as people are getting pulled out. But the truth remains, people are moving out of homelessness into housing and they're thriving. Housing first, this model of pairing housing with success with supports has an over 85% success rate across the country. It's an incredibly effective program. There's just not enough of it. And we have to talk about our shared future. We really get painted by our opposition as those people who just want people to live outside are happy with homelessness existing. And nothing could be further from the truth, right? I would not have devoted my entire career to this if I thought it was good that people lived outside. And we have to call them on that and really name that we don't want anybody to be living outside. We want to create a world where nobody is living outside. And the only way to do that is to fund things like housing and support and to go lean in on their proposals are actually going to make homelessness worse. I'm thinking about a client who was homeless in DC. He was matched to a voucher, but then the city evicted his tent and he went into hiding. His caseworkers could not find him because he was so scared. He had moved, we don't know where. So he was living outside, even though the city was paying resources for him to get into housing. But because he had been displaced and lost trust in the system, we couldn't help him. Their laws make it harder to solve homelessness, whether it's by slapping someone with a $5,000 fine, throwing someone in jail, destroying someone's ID and documents when they evict their encampments, or just destroying trust with the government. Their laws don't work and make homelessness harder to solve. And if we actually want to solve homelessness, we really need to lean in on what works. Please reach out. We are happy to help with op-eds, comms, policy needs. One of my favorite things is talking with electeds on how to do good messaging around homelessness because we know that most people in this country are paying more than they can afford in rent. And we have to use that as an opportunity to also talk about the causes of and solutions to homelessness. I took a little stab in putting this into practice. This is how we generally talk about this, and I thought it might be helpful to give you a template. Everybody needs a safe place to live, but right now, far right-wing billionaires are working with Donald Trump to make it a crime to be homeless. They don't know what most people do. More and more people are struggling to pay rent, and when the rent goes up, more people have no choice but to sleep outside. Thankfully, we know we can solve homelessness. Experience and data show that housing and support, not handcuffs or detention centers, save money and solve homelessness. We have enough resources to ensure that everybody, regardless of what they look like, where they're from, or what they do, has a safe place to call home. Solving homelessness is possible and will build safer, stronger, and more vibrant communities. This is my contact info. Um, I'm gonna stop screen sharing and would love to just see how this landed with people, what other questions folks have, how we can help, thoughts, ideas, all of that good stuff. Now I have to figure out how to stop sharing.
Thank you, Jesse.